Welcome back to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. And today's guest is the ever fantastic Jen Coe. So Jen and I have been friends for a long time now, and we're colleagues working at UK Coaching. I love Jen's brain. She processes things differently. And when the two of us get together and we talk about coaching and coach development, things can go in a million different directions. This was no different. I think half of the questions I asked, Jen just went down a different path, which is awesome. Jen is a HCPC Registered Sport Psychologist. She works full-time at the Football Association's Workforce Development Senior Lead. She was at UK Coaching. It's a high-performance coach developer, supporting coaches across 13 different Olympic sports, and was also a Performance Wellbeing Lead in the WSL. In Jen's playing life, she was a basketball player and is a published author. What a CV. Jen's books, we mentioned them in the conversation, but worth a mention. She co-authored Myths of Sports Coaching, The Myths of Sports Performance, Women Working in Sport, and a fourth book on the myths of sport and exercise psychology, all with the brilliant Amy Whitehead. Links to the publisher is in the show notes. A couple of things in the conversation that really stood out to me. Jen highlighted that coach development is at its best when people feel safe to grow, and observation before intervention. So just think about that from your coaching, or if you're working with coaches, how does observation before intervention show up for you? So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jen Coe on the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. Jen, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Obviously, we've been friends for a long time and colleagues as well. And I always find that when we talk about coaching and supporting coaches, because of the way your brain works and the way my brain works, we can go off in a million different directions. So who knows where this episode will end up. So a curveball question, just to start you off, to see what you think. And I recognize that coach development is really complex, and it's very difficult to draw down the heart of it into a sentence. Now, I'm not going to ask you to do that, but I'd like to go along in that direction. So the question is, coach development is at its best when?
I'm really going to think about this because I have the urge to answer, right?
Yeah.
Coach, maybe I'll say just what I said before I came on, because that's where my gut goes, and then I'll think about it.
I might ask you again at the end.
Yeah. Coach development is at its best when the people involved in it feel safe to grow. Broad,
Very nice.
At my heart, it is a space where somebody together collectively, one may be have led in the relationship, created a space where there's clarity, there's intention, there's excitement, but they're safe to share, to generate feedback, to have, this really rich dialogue and movement. And I don't think the movement's always with the coach. By title, you'd think, development of coaching, but I always seeing it in the players, the environment, the other coaches in that environment, some other people. I
often think about the work we do as coach developers and the learning then that happens. Well, we learn, the coaches learn. It's not a hierarchy in that respect. And then the learning is marbled together in terms of the experiences that the players have or the athletes have, and therefore then how the coach responds to that. It's not... there's a cause and effect, if you like, to everything. Yeah,
there absolutely is. Yeah, and that's so rich, isn't it? And I know in previous podcasts that you've had, brilliant ones, you've talked about the art of noticing and observational. Not necessarily just skills, but just being so present in the moment that you're picking up on the nuances of the somatics, if it's in situ, or if it's online, the language, the movement. You're asking questions that create conditions and not a dependency, I think, is a key one there. And that one of the things we're currently working and thinking on when we think about coach development and the perceived hierarchy, or if they were historically a mentor and it was like, give me the answers, or I come to a course and you're going to tell me what's on that course and tell me the answers. It's this idea that feedback should reduce the noise, not add to it. And I feel that's live for me at the moment, but has been over the years, around this idea of giving feedback, receiving feedback, generating feedback. We've heard those concepts before. It's trying to support people to add a layer of, or to dilute or have clarity, and not to add to, here's more things to think about. Here's more disruption to deal with. Anyway, took us off on a topic there.
No, you're right. And I often think that coach development sometimes well-natured can feel additive to coaches. It's just another thing I've got to think about and another thing I have to do, which is really difficult when you're a volunteer or a part-time coach, because you've only got so much time and resource to be able to go and do what you need to do. Extra learning and CPD and conversations with the best intentions can sometimes just get in the way of dealing with the actual practical realities of the role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I won't spend too much time on this because I know it's been covered a lot, is this nuance of person-led, person-centered. And Sophia Jowett's work and many, many other brilliant people and researchers since then have looked at this topic and this electricity and the connection of feeling valued. And one portion of my history as a player was 12 years, 10 coaches. That was living and breathing that. I saw it. I saw how the different coaches shaped me as an athlete, taught me about relationships, taught me about feeling seen and not seen. So there is something about when we think about developing the person and not just the performer and the coach and the title and the weight of the world that's on their shoulder. We're looking at like emotional regulation, self-awareness, recovery, and everything around the reflection, feedback, and that literacy and the identity beyond sport, which in our world primarily, or as a priority in our world, that pathway is usually player, coach, coach, developer. And so how much time has been given between those transitions to really connect or disconnect with the identity that you're leaving behind and what you're carrying with you.
And how that then influences what you do next in that sequence.
Yep.
Well, I've got another open-ended question then, just to ask you to follow on from the first one.
Sure.
So coach development is at its best when people feel safe to grow. So how do you know that you're having an impact?
Is this a question?
I mean, for context, it's Monday morning, isn't it? And this is quite a hardcore way to start the week.
This is a question that has riddled me for years. And it's caused heated debates. It's been on the table in various organizations I've worked at, where sometimes I want to dig my heels in and say, I feel it's this way, or we can't label it to be that. So I don't know if I'm closer to having an answer, but I can share a little bit of where my thoughts have gone over the time. There is something in the bias I hold of being a relational person and feeling like that rapport is the primary piece, and also the need for speed. So whether it's on a program or it's in high performance, if it's football, you're doing your season in the week. If it's an Olympic cycle, there's quota places to be gotten. So there's an expectation that you're brought in to develop. So there's something around the balance or the awareness of your values, expectations on you, who you're working for and with. And I think that kind of clarity and priming and contracting then gives you the space to be okay with the pace of movement and to manage expectations. There was a workshop I delivered in recently, and I used inquiry-based learning as the design and delivery mode. And we showed the framework and talked to the group and said, this is the way I'm going to do it today. So although the topic is this, I'm not going to give you loads of things. We're going to, as in like you go into a shop, there's going to be lots of different things here that we can work through. And you, based on how the morning goes, will pick and drop different things to engage with: topics, models, activities, connections. But we're going to start with you. And some people were like, kind of wasn't expecting that. And that feels a little bit different. It's like very far away from tell. And I think a lot of my friends who work in universities have seen a transition over the years of like, I'm paying for this. Can you just give me the answers? What's going to be on the exam? So the coach development, I think, is happening when we're in a space where new things are happening, or different things are happening, or the conversation shifts over time from who leads it, or there's an opportunity for people to feel like they have space, they have prioritized or allocated space to think about their growth, to see things in a different way, to be receptive to a different way of doing things, to be vulnerable enough to engage with learning opportunities, and to see the space of like, if one of the intentions is to create a more inclusive environment or challenging environment, to create more skillful players or better decision makers, or to have better in-game decision making, then we'd be able to see a start and a finish of that in how we structure that because there's an openness. But what if there's loads of other small bits that have led to that or came as tributaries from that? I think that's when you kind of see, oh gosh, okay, there's all of these other areas that expand the success criteria. And I'll give an example to that lengthy answer. One of the most impactful pieces of work that I've done over the years is when I have worked with a coach and then we brought in their manager or a PD or a HO, the coach development, or someone who is like overseeing their development wider or more specific in the relationship. And they sit down and they have a conversation I facilitate it. So they think I'm coming in to give an update. And then they sit down and I ask certain questions. There's a relationship where the coach feels trusted and backed and connected with me. So we prime that conversation. We go in and that fluidity, that openness, that check and challenge is just the growth and development in there. I've seen people been allocated spots on programs on the back of those meetings that has been coming for a couple of years. You know, the opportunity's there. We want to give you opportunity, and then the opportunity comes. Or I've also seen people get better relationships with the sport and less grievance with them, and I'm not seen and I'm not heard, and they understand a different perspective. Or they hear that they're really good. So there's a validation in this lonely space that they operate as a coach. They hear that the organisation sees them and they're on their radar, and it just maybe hasn't been verbalised. And this opportunity, you know, moves that confidence, moves that energy to a different level.
So much in what you've just said, Jen. My crazy brain has gone off in a certain direction, actually, with something that you just said. And listening to you and how thoughtful you are around the way that you go and support learning for coaches and engage in coach development conversations. You used the words earlier, seen and heard. And I can imagine that coaches working with you feel exactly that. And something that I've been thinking about a lot recently is the wider system of supporting coaches and the lack of congruence between if a coach is receiving support from you, you're creating this incredible environment for them to feel safe to grow. But actually then that when that relationship comes to an end or there's a natural transition from that day-to-day support with you into something else or someone else, and it's not the same, does that then disrupt the learning and the experience of the coach in a negative way? And I say this partly because I was having a conversation with somebody recently about co-creating goals with players. And I've been doing some of this with some of the work in my coaching at Oxford recently. And they say, this is all great, right? You're doing stuff which is really progressive and it's side by side with a player that's got loads of benefits to it. But what if other coaches who this player works with don't adopt that philosophy? What are you setting the player up for? And I wonder in our wider system around supporting coaches, how much of a shared understanding of what good coach development looks like is there?
I thought you were going to ask a different question on the back of that. You know where I thought I'll share where my head went. I will answer your question. I went to the grapple that we've discussed over the years when you lift somebody out of a space into a wonderful experience and then you bring them back into the toxic system. So that is why I try and keep my world of psychology and coach development really close together, because so many years working with athletes and they feel we've had a good conversation and we've shared some insight and they feel like, yeah, I can go and do this, I can da-da-da. And then you leave and you hear somebody just absolutely tear your work down and they're not even aware in the language that they use. But equally, you made me think, and I will segue into your question, is the reality of when we're working with coaches, we're also talking about what I've just said there, club culture. We're talking about job security. We're talking about reward structures. If I wave this flag to say I need a bit of support, or to challenge something that has come up in a one-to-one or in situ visit, or like something has clicked and they go, oh gosh, I need to do more of that. I need to lead this and do that, and cause some disruption in the short term, positive, but you know, they're changing something. There's a leadership behavior adjustment there, and there's some politics that we've got to be aware of. So go back to your question. So I ask your question again now, so I answer that one.
What I asked, it was more that like the congruency in the system. How do we make sure that there's is there a shared understanding of what good coach development practice looks like?
No, there isn't. Is it because the profession of coach development still feels like it's in an embryonic stage? Is it that there are some amazing, incredible people that we have engaged in experience with working in the space, leading, designing experiences or opportunities, that we feel like we've been privileged to be part of a space where a group of people are aligned to our way of thinking about the development of people, development of coaching. But the industry, the global development of people and the growth of learning and development, even post-COVID, and access and enhancements in digital connectivity, social media growth, and the learning through 500 TikTok videos a day, all of that has to be considered in the positive opportunities. But we've, as coach developers, I think there's a massive, massive weight and opportunity and threat. You've got to grow with that, just as coaching has had to evolve. So I think, there's certain spaces in my current world at the moment. We've put in a licensing system, which the word sounds clunky, but we know that 600 people have an understanding of our direction of travel. They've had an opportunity to have a professional discussion or an observation, and they'll have the second part of that. They've gone through a self-assessment process. They have a development plan. So there's something in that insular world that we're operating within football to say, here's where we can say the direction of travel to the next stage. If you're interested in fine-tuning your coach development, if you want to be part of a community inside football in the short term and outside that, here's some information to think about. Like, we're growing and it's messy, but that's what we're doing. And then there's loads of great work being done with a number of different key stakeholders, including UK Sport driving it around the professionalisation and the professional standards. And I'm hoping we can align that pathway and have that opportunity. So there is an opportunity in the very basic sense for organisations who are raising the eyebrows on coach development to go, we need a bit of that. Actually, that's worked really well. Can we get more of that? Or ex-coach experienced something on a programme and we attribute that to the success we're having. Let's get more of that. That they have a job description and a recruitment process and that kind of thing that can lead to getting brilliant people in to do the job that you need. And as per every recruitment and growing team, it'll be the right person, but the baseline, maybe skill set, experience, exposure, philosophy could be more connected, I think. But I don't think it can be one definite, I think that's the tricky part, isn't it? There's not a whole plethora of qualifications. And then in the nature of what you're doing, how rigid should you be on, you must have a master's. You must be privileged enough to be able to pay for a master's, to then have that experience. And then in most cases people, oh gosh, I'm going really off here now, but in most cases, if people haven't had a positive experience in the academic route in school and further education, then are we saying that you're limited in that skill set that you could have with amazing listening or an art of noticing or connection with people or football technical knowledge or sport technical knowledge can't play a really key part? You
said it yourself, coach development feels like it's at an embryonic stage, or the role of the coach developer is. Anyway, my sense is that people carry the experiences and maybe the baggage in some cases of what coach education has looked like and felt like, and the role of people who deliver coach education. And there's this slow transition into then, well, how is coach development different or similar? And what are the knowledge and the skills and the way that that work should be undertaken is just different. It's not saying that coach education and formal qualifications are bad. Quite the opposite. The coach education and coach development are brilliant allies. Should be working in sync with each other in any thriving system, but one is not the other. So we should think about how do we create and support more informed coach developers. Jen, I'm going to change the subject, take us off in a different direction. Since we last were working together, you've become a world famous author.
Have I? Thanks.
So I hear. So tell us about your books and the experience of the experience you've been through, getting them out to the wider world, and some of the things that you've learnt along the way.
Oh gosh, what a cool experience. So we've got 4 books. One is coming out in 2026. The first 2 stemmed from Dr. Amy Whitehead and myself being in the psychology world, good friends, exposure to environments where things were coming back, ways of thinking, ways of being and doing that were hindering their ability to perform. And so we'd had a conversation. She knew a publisher who'd gone out on his own in Sequoia Publishing, and all of a sudden we had 20 people in front of us and said, hey, do you want to write a chapter on this topic? Because you are the expert in this area, or you have an interest, a researcher, you're on the ground. So that book ended up with 32 people, Myths of Sports Coaching, 20 chapters on topics that were in curriculum that were being check and challenged, in the ether, in the sportscape of, you must do this and you must have this and it should be this and it is this. We were fortunate enough for each of the authors then to offer their time at the end of the month. So we ran an 18-month, last Wednesday of the month session, and they talked about their progression of the research. They talked about anything that had evolved since they wrote the chapter. It was probably 2 years prior, 18 months prior. And that was just electric. Like, it was electric. It was running itself. And so I love the books and I think they're brilliant. And I feel like I'm able to say that because I don't feel like I've written them. It's like a nice balance. I'm like, that book is awesome. And the shift that we saw curriculum being written, torn up and started again. We saw people sharing the book globally. The reach was massive. The authors had people connecting and reaching out to get work in different spaces. So there was a brilliant ripple effect there. It was accessible. That was a nice bit of feedback. And that's what we wanted the book to be. This book that they just like pick and drop, and the feel of the page, the feel of the book, the language in the book, the QR codes that you could scan to do the video. All of these we were thinking about who would use the book, who would be the recipient and the end user of that. But then, of course, we had some people coming on to these seminars that said, you forgot this topic, you forgot that topic. So book 2 came out, which was The Myths of Sports Performance, a nice expansion. We had 42 people contribute. So there was a lot of traction, a lot of interest in being involved in that. And of course, with that, the topics were broader as per the title. So we went into analysis and motherhood and sleep and stretching, periodization, phenomenal stuff, like the detail of it, just really, really cool. And again, the similar stuff. So we haven't finished the seminar series, but all of the videos in the last 12 months for sports performance, 18 months prior, have gone up on the publisher's YouTube page for free. So there's an opportunity for people to learn and engage with topics, to check and challenge, to use them as a vehicle in their environment to say, hey, appreciate, like I had to do this even last week. Someone was saying, yeah, learning styles. And I was like, I appreciate the angle. There's a really good chapter in this book. It's an amazing bit of work. It wasn't to make people feel silly or embarrass them. It was to politely reframe their thinking on something that they just maybe hopped on the bandwagon of. And until somebody check and challenged it a little bit, it wasn't going to stir. But it could have been detrimental. So I think where things like that zombie myth had lingered, and there was 4. Anna talks about in the chapter, there's 40, maybe actually more if I haven't revisited that in ages. But I usually say 40 to 50 different ways you can engage. So it's just the creativity and expansion of this idea that you might have just been writing things on a board and there's other ways to do it, and not just to latch on to the kinesthetic learner. And from that, then we had 72 contributors, a whole host of amazing chapters, loads of seminars, and we had the NBA, the NFL, the Australian Institute. We had people from all over the world listening and reading and connecting. The reflection for me personally was the stories and the conversations that we had around each chapter led to the Women Working in Sport book. So our third book wasn't going to be just 20 chapters of women telling great stories, because that's fantastic and that is helpful and that is, a really core part of the book. But we wanted to influence, as we were talking about there, systemic change. We wanted to come back around and go, these women have endured, made incredibly tough choices to be trailblazers in their space to keep that door open. And in some cases, some of those people were in really horrible situations. So whilst we're celebrating the story and the excellence and groundbreaking work that they've done to be in these spaces to challenge norms, there's a portion of the incredible women in that book who are still holding on to those experiences whilst they look at the opportunities they've created. So there's something in this leaving the ladder down. There's something in seeing it and being it, that we can't ignore what people go through to get to where they are, to provide and afford opportunities for others. And we realized probably halfway through the production of that book that the people who have maybe blind spots or a lot of are just ignorant or close-minded or somewhere along that continuum, they might not look at that book on the shelf and pick it up. So now we're in a tricky space where we want to have the conversations in a way that says, you don't have to feel intimidated. Do you have any people from an equity standpoint in your environment how inclusive are you in how you engage and who sits at the table and what is on the agenda, to look at the incredible work that can be produced with diversity of thought and diversity across the board in Europe. So we've heard an amazing amount of feedback from people who've read the book and felt inspired. Brilliant. We've heard from organisations who have picked up the book or been passed along the book, or the story has been told, where they have shifted a way of working, being more inclusive in the teams that they have across a load of different categories and considerations. So that's the juicy one. And then, of course, psychology said to Amy, do you have another book in you? And she was like, oh, Jen, do we have another book in us? I don't know. And so we looked at the myths of sports and exercise psychology. And the network we have is absolutely extensive. Amy is absolutely incredible in the job she's in. So she has sparked loads of ideas. I'm coming from a different route. I'm definitely way behind her in the psychology space of training, and she's an associate professor in Liverpool John Moore around this topic, practitioner work, all of this. So it was really interesting how we both came at it, and I think that's the richness of our relationship and putting that together, is how it's written. How do we find a blend of it not being too academic? How do we find really brilliant people who've had incredible experiences? But this particular one as well, we introduced the idea that practitioners, coaches, multidisciplinary teams can still learn a bit about psychology for coaches, but the students who are coming through any kind of route to be a sports psychologist can look at this book now and see, gosh, these are the names I'm reading papers and books about. Here they are, check and challenging some stuff, backing and building on different topics. So yeah, that's coming out in 2026.
Wow, what a repertoire. See, you are a world famous author. So out of all the chapters and the themes that you've covered, what do people reach out to you about the most?
Good question. What do we talk about? Reach out and talk about. It's interesting, because that book came when I was transitioning from West Ham, started it just at the end of that, West Ham into the WSL. So what was really relevant at the time was contributing and understanding how we shift our narrative around female athlete health, maternity policies. I'd been fortunate enough to be in a space where I could support players who wanted to have the conversation with the organisation about thinking about being pregnant, some of them planning IVF, so it wasn't accidental, unexpected in those cases as well. How do you have that conversation? And then into the years, like the end of that year, into the following year where I was wearing a different hat, they felt supported to have a conversation. They felt informed to be able to facilitate that. The multidisciplinary team could have an understanding about maybe initially the cotton wool approach of like, oh, you must stay away now. No more exercise, no more this. So what's the level of training, exposure, connectivity with the team, not forgetting identity and what they'll go through, to now where we have, and I'll speak from football because that's I'm more informed in that space. The facilities have changed. So there's an awareness and a knowledge piece for clubs across the board and all their staff and players. So they can manage each other's expectations. They can have open conversations. Nobody sees it as the end of the world. Nobody's leaving. They can come back. They can stay for a period of time. They don't have to go and feel disconnected from the team as a player. Equally, I've heard that some clubs have facilities on site to manage breastfeeding, to have creches, to have just staff on site like Performance Wellbeing Leads or Sport Psychologists, having this, as I said, the staff, coaches, coaching and technical team more informed, the multidisciplinary team up to date on female athlete health. So there's a phenomenal amount of work being done with the WSL to not just have policy there, but to have training and upskilling. And then, as I said, for the players through various organisations like the PFA and the FA to have policies and support systems in place for the players. So those chapters in there that challenge myths around women, maternity, motherhood, training, performance, they've come back around a lot. I said the learning styles, I'll use that because it's a light one that's there. Resilience chapter, coach development chapter, because of the nature of the space I'm operating in and sharing that out. See it, be it. I mean, I don't come from football and I work in this space, all the work around females working and women working in sport. So yeah, there's I could probably go on and
Yeah.
I
So
don't want to
much
leave
in there.
anyone out, but there's so much in there. Yeah.
We'll put some links in the show notes so people can take a look and maybe access some of the YouTube videos as well to deep dive and see a bit more. But thank you, Jen. They sound great. I feel like we could just talk forever, but I'm going to honour the structure of the podcast. So in the next part of our conversation, we ask every guest to contribute something to our ever-growing game plan, to this shared playbook of ideas and stories and memories and thoughts that coaches can reflect on. So, Jen, what would you like to add into our game plan today?
I was thinking about this. I think there's something around, I have some notes here, actually, the bullet points of something I wanted to mention. So when I think of game plan, I'm thinking about observation before intervention.
Okay.
So don't rush to fix. Mirroring language. So from me, Tom, there's a lot around how we work, how we operate, the language that we use. I think when I talked to earlier on about inquiry-based learning and questioning, there was something around that mirroring of language, the nudging, the types of questions in the game plan of really think before you talk. The game plan here, this is one where we talk about the movement and the actions within coach development. So naming the tensions that the coach is carrying. So it's performance versus politics, development versus survival. And then the other one that I was thinking about was separating the person from the behavior. So I'm not saying this is easy, but I think there's something around the journey that people are on when they hear, first of all, if it doesn't align with your values, then don't go in there. Don't go to that space. Don't take that job. And people are just not in a place to do that. They just really aren't. There's not a lot of jobs. There's not a lot of well-paid jobs that people can go, just my value is this, this, and this, and you don't align, so I'm going to leave. And then where do you get a job? So I think there is some, that's probably really binary, but there's a reality around maybe the non-negotiables and then how you lean into those and how long you'll stay on an exit plan. And why am I saying that? Because I think when you enter different spaces, there'd be opportunities for people to grow within that space, feel challenged within that space, have a strong support network around them. So the game plan is when you're working to see the person from the behavior. And then I suppose the tail end of that is, which could be the answer to another question in a bit, is your personal boardroom is coming back to that and going, can I do all of these with a boardroom of people, a network of people around me that empower me to grow and empower me to feel like I can do those things in the game plan?
Well, I asked for one. You've offered four, which is awesome. Observation before intervention, mirroring language and thinking about the types of questions you might ask. And you said thinking before you talk, and naming the tensions that the coach is carrying and separate the person from the behavior. Can I zoom in on the tensions piece? Mm-hmm. So why is that important to start naming the tensions that the coach is carrying?
I think there's two parts to it. One part is the movement of the relationship. You'll feel it and you'll sense that there's something there. You'll notice that there's something they're not comfortable with, something hasn't landed. They veer away from that type of conversation. So to move the relationship, having the ability to call the tensions out, share the observation that you're having is really important. So there's a movement, an actionable kind of, movable item. I can't think of the better word to write there for the coach. And the other side of it is it's healthy. If you think of Lencioni's model, the 5 dysfunctions of a team, we've got trust at the base. The second most important thing that he thinks for building a team and that we know that we need to have is conflict. And so I'm not saying that the tension is the conflict, but we can't shy away from a tension, a difference, and the concepts that might be familiar with people sitting with the difference. We can't shy away from somebody thinking a little bit different to us. And is there a tension in what they're carrying? Is there a tension in what we're carrying? So there's one thing about movement for them and growth and development within that relationship. But there's another thing about the importance of sometimes the difficulty in going there when it's not all bells and whistles. And that was brilliant and you're amazing and I'm amazing. And that kind of toxic positivity gospel.
Did you say the 5 dysfunctions of a team?
Yeah, Lencioni.
Okay.
So the 5 dysfunctions of a team: absence of trust. The team struggle when people hide mistakes, avoid admitting weakness, and don't ask for help. Fear of conflict. So avoidance or fear of conflict. When trust is low, the teams avoid healthy disagreement. And that's kind of what I was alluding to for the carrying tension. There's like an artificial harmony. Meetings after meetings after meetings, and like passive compliance. So how do we get to a point in this one-to-one? If you're doing some coach development work in a classroom around a qualification, how can we move things on and not feel like that person's an awkward person or the player is uncoachable, and all those labels that come with that because we haven't addressed the tension that they're carrying? Then there's lack of commitment that goes further up the pyramid. If the debate is shallow, the buy-in is shallow. Avoidance of accountability. When commitment is weak, peer accountability disappears. So that's when we start to see the standards drift and excuses being normalised, etc. And then inattention to results is at the top of the pyramid, which links to status, ego, personal success over the collective outcomes. And I'm going to be honest with you, there's some of that I'm seeing, living and breathing, having to check in with myself. When you are around a lot of people who've been through a lot of different change, and they kind of predict the future patterns of behaviour in the organisation, that might make them behave in a certain way. And so the ego comes out, and how do I put my stamp on this document or this way of working? And we lose sight momentarily, hopefully, on the collective direction of travel. And that can happen with a team if somebody's not getting the playing time that they need, or a coach hasn't got the opportunities, or the feedback isn't there, and the sense of belonging. Talk about self-determination there. If we jump around, the sense of belonging isn't there, the sense of relatedness isn't there. So the collective team isn't going towards the North Star anymore because somebody's worried about individual performance and how does this look, and I'm less important, and etc. So it's a cool one to have a dive into.
I've learned something very new today. I'm going to go and look at that, and I think that's a brilliant idea for coaches to explore and think about how it relates back into their own experiences. All right, final part of our conversation, our game-changing advice. And I know that the listeners to this really appreciate tangible, clear stuff that they can go and try out in their own coaching world. Now, I fully appreciate that whatever you share, Jen, coaches might be able to pick up and try out and apply it straight away. They might want to edit it depending on the context or the situation they find themselves working in, who they're with, when they're with them. Or it might just be an idea that they hold on to and they reflect on and maybe come to a bit later. So what's your game-changing advice for coaches?
I was thinking about this and trying to think about some tangible things. So at the core of who I am, and have been for a really long time, it's about environments. And I really believe that if you build environments where people feel safe enough to be honest, to be stretched, to stretch themselves enough to grow, then, that's our direction of travel. But there's not like practical stuff within that. So I'll do a little snapshot. So that would be the one-liner. That would be the takeaway. Think about the environment that you have where people feel safe enough to be honest. I think what I worry about giving that, when I tried to synopsize that, I was thinking, well, now I'm doing something that frustrates me. You give the words and you're not talking about what they actually mean. So the practical examples that I thought about, start with one honest question. Why didn't that work today at the end of a session? And model it by answering yourself. So often we have plenaries or points in a session or end of session where one voice is heard or the captain contributes, or you're sitting with something that you feel like didn't work. And as the coach, you might feel the need to tell somebody it didn't work. So why didn't that work at the end of the session? And model it by answering it first yourself. Building safety in this mentality of I'll go first, but then holding that space for at least 2 or 3 people to contribute. So Brene Brown, as you and maybe a lot of your listeners will be really familiar with, the shame piece in coaching, I've seen so often over the years, the public embarrassment by highlighting somebody. So make mistakes visible. What did I get wrong this week? What would you challenge? When leaders model vulnerability, learning accelerates. And so that even in itself is more words when leaders model vulnerability. But there is something in saying, I don't know the answer to that. I got this wrong. I put the set pieces in this part of the training session and it was too late in the day, or we should have spent more time on this, or, and I'm not thinking everything is kind of negative. Raise the standard publicly and coach privately. So that kind of links to the shame piece as well. There's something about the nuance of knowing your people, knowing your individuals. So we think about, and I won't go on more than that, but if we're talking about building environments where people feel safe enough to be honest and stretched enough to grow, how can you move the dial and the feeling of enjoyment for every single person that's in the space with you? And I think that is being really mindful of the stuff we mentioned earlier on as well. Who are the people? What are their needs? What way do they like to engage with listening, questioning, answers? So you can do this observation before intervention, and you can not publicly humiliate them by calling them out on something. You can coach privately and the team can thrive together.
So tempted to just to add stuff and different ideas, but I'm going to leave it as it is because that's just brilliant what you shared. And I really, really appreciate that honest question, modeling the humility, the vulnerability as a leader or as a coach, and it almost gives permission for then everybody that you're working with to follow suit. Jen, so many incredible things in our conversation, I think, for the listeners to reflect on. It's always a pleasure spending time with you and exploring different things around coaching. So thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Thanks, Tom. Really appreciate it. As always, great conversation with you.
Thanks for listening to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please follow the show and share it with a coach who might find it useful. I'd love to hear your feedback and any ideas you have for future guests. You can get in touch through the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening and go well in your next coaching session. Well, thank you for listening to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. A brilliant conversation. Always a pleasure to spend time with Jen. Some things that really stuck with me in the conversation: dysfunctions of a team. It's not new, but hearing Jen frame it through a coaching lens and a coach development lens gave it a real freshness. So that unaddressed tension that can get in the way of trust, shallow debate leading to shallow buy-in, and how then the teams drift, start protecting themselves rather than serving the collective. That's really relevant on the training pitch just as much as it is in the boardroom. So worth looking up if you've not seen it before. And there was something that Jen said towards the end of the conversation about vulnerability, leaders and coaching modeling vulnerability, being willing to say, I don't know, I got it wrong, that didn't work, and how that accelerates learning. If you are able to model yourself as being vulnerable, imperfect, it lets people in. It gives permission and opportunity for other people to bring their contributions to the team. So, a one-liner that I'm taking away from the conversation: coach development is at its best when people feel safe to grow. It's simple, and it's worth asking yourself honestly, does the environment that you create actually feel like that for the people who are in it? Thanks again for listening to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. The links to Jen's books are in the show notes, and go well in your next coaching session.